The doctor didn't waste words. He sat across from me in that small office, folded his hands, and said my son Caleb needed emergency surgery within 72 hours. Without it, his heart would fail. I remember how my fingers went cold. I asked what would happen if we waited. He looked at me steadily and said, "He won't make it." I was 34 years old, a single mother, and I had exactly nothing in my savings account. The hospital gave me a printed estimate before I left the building. I sat in my car and stared at the number. It was more than I made in an entire year. I called my bank. I called 2 friends. I searched every option I could find. Nothing came close. Caleb was 8 years old. He collected rocks and drew pictures of dinosaurs and still asked me to read to him at night. I would have given anything for him, but I had nothing. I had one option left. My parents lived 40 minutes away in the house I grew up in. They were retired and comfortable. My father had managed a manufacturing company for 30 years, and they owned their home outright. I knew they had savings. I had never once asked them for money as an adult. Not once in 12 years. I drove to their house with shaking hands, rehearsing what I would say. I told myself they would say yes immediately. Caleb had sat in their living room at Christmas every single year. My father opened the door and let me in without a word. My mother sat in her usual chair by the window. Neither looked surprised when I sat down. I told them about Caleb's diagnosis. I described the timeline, the surgery, what the doctor had said. My father listened with his arms crossed. When I finished, he didn't ask a single question about Caleb. He didn't ask where my son was, or how frightened he must be. He looked at me like he was waiting for the part he already knew was coming. I asked him. I kept my voice as steady as I could. I told him the exact amount. I said I would pay it back however long it took. I said Caleb would die without it. My father uncrossed his arms, leaned forward and said, "We're not doing this. Not we can't. Not we don't have it. We're not doing this," like it was a decision already made before I arrived. My mother said nothing. She looked at the floor. I waited for one of them to take it back. Neither did. I looked at my mother. We had always been closer than my father and I. I had called her the day Caleb was born. She had held him before I did. I watched her face and waited for her to speak. Her hands were folded in her lap. She pressed her lips together and looked toward the window. She did not look at me. That silence told me everything. Whatever decision had been made in that house, it had been made by both of them. I stood up slowly and walked out. I made it to my car before the shaking started. I sat behind the wheel and couldn't move. The night was quiet, and inside that house were 2 people who had just chosen to let their grandson die. That's what I understood sitting there. Not that they didn't have the money, not that they couldn't help, that they had decided not to. I don't fully remember the drive home. I remember arriving, checking on Caleb, who was asleep, and standing in his doorway for a very long time, watching him breathe. I was almost to the end of the front path when the door opened behind me. My mother had followed me outside. For one moment I felt something rise in my chest. She walked toward me slowly, glancing back once at the house. Then she stopped and spoke quietly, as if she had chosen each word in advance. "You need to stop looking to us to fix your mistakes," she said. "Your brother has a future we have to protect." Then she went back inside and the door closed behind her. I sat at my kitchen table until nearly 3 in the morning. Your brother has a future. My brother Nolan was 26, still in graduate school, living rent-free. They were protecting his future. Not that they had nothing to give. They had made a calculation about which of their children was worth the investment, and I had lost. Caleb had lost. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours making calls, filling out emergency assistance forms, doing everything I could think of to keep moving. I spent the next 2 days doing everything possible. I sold my laptop. I borrowed small amounts from 3 people. I called the hospital's financial assistance line and was told the review took weeks. A children's cardiac charity said their funds were already allocated. By the second afternoon, I was sitting in Caleb's hospital room, watching him sleep with monitors on his chest, and I knew I had run out of options. I held his hand and thought about what I would say to the doctor in the morning. That last night, Caleb was more awake than he had been in days. He asked if the doctors were going to fix him. I said they were doing everything they could. He asked if I was scared. I told him no, which was the biggest lie I had ever told. He asked me to stay in the room, so I pulled the visitor chair beside his bed and held his hand. He fell asleep before I did. I watched his face in the dim light and memorized every part of it. I was still in the chair when the alarm sounded. Nurses moved fast. I was pushed into the hallway. I stood outside the door and understood from the sounds what was happening before anyone told me. When the doctor came out and looked at me, his face said everything before his mouth opened. Caleb's heart had given out. The surgery that could have saved him had never happened. My 8-year-old son, who collected rocks and drew dinosaurs, was gone. I planned the funeral by myself. My parents did not come. They sent a card with a printed message inside and their names signed at the bottom. I threw it away. I buried Caleb on a Tuesday morning with a few of his school friends and their parents, people who barely knew him but showed up anyway. I stood at the grave and felt completely hollow. Grief is a strange thing. In those first days, it doesn't feel like sadness. It feels like the removal of something that had been keeping you upright. After the funeral, I called my parents once. My father answered. I told him I didn't want to hear from either of them again. He started to say something, and I hung up. I changed my number 2 weeks later. My mother tried to reach me through a cousin, and I asked the cousin not to pass on any more messages. I wasn't performing. I wasn't making a point. I simply had nothing left to say to them. The silence that followed was not painful. It was a relief. I moved through the months that followed in a careful routine. I went to work. I slept. I saw a grief counselor who helped me understand that surviving something doesn't mean you are okay. I kept Caleb's rock collection on my bedroom windowsill. I didn't move it. There were days when everything felt manageable, and days when the weight returned and I had to sit still and wait for it to pass. I did not think about my parents. I had made my decision about them, and I lived inside it. 8 months after the funeral, my cousin Lauren called. She asked if I was sitting down. I said yes. She told me my brother Nolan had collapsed at his apartment 2 evenings before and had been taken to the hospital by ambulance. The doctors were still running tests and it was serious. My parents were there. She asked carefully whether I was going to come. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time before I answered her. I went. Part of me wanted to see Nolan, who had never done anything to me directly. Part of me needed to close something I had left open. I drove to the same hospital where Caleb had died. I parked in the same lot. I walked through the same front entrance. The smell of the place hit me before I was fully through the doors, and I had to stop and stand still for a moment before I could keep moving. I found the floor Nolan was on and walked toward the waiting area. I saw my parents before they saw me. They sat together in the hallway outside Nolan's room. My mother's hands were pressed in her lap. My father looked older than I remembered. When my mother looked up and saw me, something crossed her face I couldn't name. Not quite guilt, more like fear. My father nodded once. I sat down on the opposite side of the hallway and did not speak to either of them. We waited in silence, the three of us, for a doctor to come. The doctor came out after 20 minutes. He was tall, carrying a tablet, and looked at all three of us before he began. He went through Nolan's test results carefully. Then he paused in a way that didn't feel routine. He asked whether any other family members had recently been treated at this hospital for a serious cardiac event. My mother frowned. My father said no. The doctor looked at me. I don't know what showed in my face, but something must have. He asked, gently, whether I had lost a child at this hospital within the last year. The hallway went quiet. I heard the ventilation system hum above us. My parents both turned and looked at me at the same time. I said yes. I told him my son had died 8 months ago. I told him his name was Caleb. The doctor wrote something on his tablet and then looked up at my parents with an expression that was careful and very grave. He explained in plain language. Nolan's results had flagged a rare inherited cardiac condition. It was a genetic mutation unusual enough that protocol required looking for other cases in the family. The word inherited sat in the air like something I could see. My father said there must be a mistake. The doctor said, calmly, that two patients with the same rare mutation in the same family was not a coincidence. It was a pattern. It ran in the blood. The doctor pulled up Caleb's file on his tablet. He had found it in the system the moment I confirmed the name. He showed my parents the recorded results from Caleb's workup. The same mutation, the same markers. He said Caleb had likely been born with the condition. It had been present in his blood from the beginning. My father's face went very still. My mother's hands had stopped moving entirely. The doctor said the condition was manageable with the right intervention. The surgery had been necessary, but if the genetic component had been caught earlier, there were treatments that might have prevented the crisis entirely. He said the word inherited once more. He looked at my parents and said simply that at least one of them carried the mutation and had passed it to both Nolan and Caleb. The condition that killed my son had come from inside their own family. It had lived in their blood long before Caleb was born. No one spoke. I watched the understanding move across my parents' faces. My father processing that the gene he carried had killed his grandson. My mother realizing that the child they refused to save had been carrying their own family's illness, the same illness now threatening Nolan. They had not refused to help a stranger's child. They had refused to save a child whose condition came directly from them. That cruelty was not something I gave to them. It was something they had built themselves and now had to carry. I didn't speak to my parents after that. I checked with a nurse about Nolan's care and left my number in case he wanted to reach me when he was stronger. Then I walked out through the same entrance, past the same front desk, into the same parking lot. I sat in my car for a while. I thought about Caleb. I thought about his rocks on the windowsill. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt something quieter. I felt like a door had finally closed on a room I had never wanted to be in. I drove home.